Hello everybody, welcome back to Kosmos. Some exciting tool acquisitions here. First of all, I'd like to briefly show my new press. No, it's not this little watchmaker's press, the smallest press I own. In fact, it's this one, standing on the pallet truck. So, quite a difference in scale. And if I just tilt the camera upwards, you can see another of today's acquisitions. So I'll go into those in a little bit more detail in a few moments after I clear some of the smaller things out of the way. So today I went to one of my favorite tool shops locally, and I was able to collect this press, which is an old English-made Milco broaching press. So I'll show that in a bit more detail in a few moments. But a few other odds and ends that I picked up are in this box. But actually, before I go into that, I wanted to just revisit this statement I made about the little press. So that really is the smallest press I own. More typically though, a watchmaker would use a press of that sort of size, and so that's called a staking tool. And so that flat platen there is the stake, and there are other stakes that can go in. And I know on YouTube at the moment with, well, not just at the moment, but over the past while, there's been a kind of running joke between some of the American machinist types, particularly Adam Booth, A-Bomb 79, and Tom Lipton, about who's got the biggest hammer, tap wrench, this and that. And then of course, people have gone to the other end of the scale and made some very small and beautiful miniature hammers and sent them as gifts to those folk. I'd like to show, I'm not ashamed to show off my smallest hammer. And I know this is way bigger than some of the hammers that have actually been shown on Tom Lipton's channel. But this is very light, beautifully shaped handle. And the point that I'd like to make about this is it's an actual working tool. It's not a model. It's not a miniature. This is actually something that would be used in anger by a watchmaker at the bench. Now that's a staking tool, and I have, just out of shot, the staking set, which contains all the different sized punches that a watchmaker, may require in the course of his work. So some of them aren't in that great condition. This isn't my only staking set, but it's the Bowley, which is a German-made tool. Very, very good quality thing. And so you see there's graduated sizes of flat punch with holes, flat punches without holes. There are domed punches with holes, particularly used for riveting the arbors onto a wheel. And so, well, actually that's quite cute. That's a little lifter. So that, because sometimes you can't get your fingers right in there, and so you just use a little lifter. You just squeeze it on, and it lifts out the punch you've selected, and then that goes back. So I won't go into the whole operation of this, but basically this hammer could very easily be used on a tool like that. You may in fact use a heavier hammer for a lot of the riveting operations that would be required, but this is my smallest hammer, and I'm quite proud that it's an original vintage tool designed to be used on a day-to-day basis. So enough about that. Oh yes, these are the smallest punches I own. So with a press, you'd want an arbor of some sort, and with the staking tool, you've seen these little punches. Well, these are the smallest punches I own, and I don't know if you can see, they've got a kind of dog's leg on them, and so at that very end of that crooked tip is the acting face of that punch, and so that would be used for something called driving a cylinder out. So on antique watches of not the best quality, but you know, the ubiquitous continental watches of the 19th century, they had what was known as a cylinder escapement. The pivots often got broken off, and so you'd use that to get inside the cylinder and punch the removable pivot out. You can see that's absolutely tiny, and it's got a polished end. You can just see it catching the light. More about that some other time. I love the cute little turned wooden tube that this sort of thing used to be supplied in. That's the original little wooden box. So on to more seriously sized stuff. People often say to me, "Oh, you know, you're a watchmaker. Why do you need such, you know, so many big and heavy tools, and why do you do so much like engineering stuff?" And my answer to that is, well, if you want to be able to do everything in horology, you need to be able to make tools and make equipment and kind of get on with jobs without needing to rely on others. And so that's why my workshop has a scope all the way from, you know, a milling machine that you've already seen in other videos, an 11 or 12-inch swing lathe, down to little almost microscopic tools like this. Plus, I enjoy it. I mean, I enjoy getting my hands dirty. I enjoy seeing metal shavings peeling off a bar of steel, and so that's it. That's the reason. So not terribly exciting stuff, but vaguely interesting nonetheless. What we have is, now this looks very boring. It's a selection of solders, lead solder. But the point about me buying these is you can't buy this anymore in Europe. All the solder you can generally find is lead-free, which for some applications just won't do. So the dealer had, you know, a whole box of different solders. So I picked up a bunch, you know, 4 different sizes, and quite a few of them are the self-fluxing rosin cord solder. In another video, I struggled quite a lot with some soldering operations, not particularly because of the solder I had, but because of bad process. But in any event, you know, when I find that kind of thing, you know, it was pretty cheap, and so I stocked up. It'll outlive me definitely, because I hardly do any soldering. This is, I borrowed this from him. So this is the, I don't know what you call that. Onto this dovetail plate would fit the compound slide on a Myford ML10 lathe, which is a very small lathe that they make. I may have mentioned in another video, I'm not sure if I've published that video yet, about the American Aloris tool posts that are just a little bit overscale for my lathe, and I need to drop down my compound slide by a certain amount in order to make it work well. And so I'm just experimenting with seeing what's available as standard without requiring me to do too much engineering. So I borrowed this from him just to see if that fits. It could form the subplate or the base plate for basically a new compound slide arrangement that I would have to engineer myself. So I'll return that to him or buy it, depending on the outcome. Another book, I already have a later edition of this book, Donald de Carle's The Watchmaker's Lathe and How to Use It. So when was this published? £3.75. Right, so this is the second edition, third impression. So second edition 1971, reprinted in 74 and again in 76. First written in 52. second edition there. So there would have been more information added to the lathe book by 71 when the second edition came out. So Donald de Carle's name is ubiquitous in horology. I think he used to be the workshop manager or the head of watches at Garrard, the Crown Jewelers. I speak under correction, but I believe that is the case. I seem to remember reading his obituary in the Horological Journal, in an older journal really, when he died in the 1990s. And so he describes pretty much every lathe that would have been available at that time in the 70s, which is more or less every lathe that you could still buy today. There's not much else been added to the field of watchmakers' lathes. Certainly, there are some lathes being made in China, but they are more or less clones of what was already made. And so there we have the beautiful American Levin lathe. I'm just trying to see if they have the Bowley F1, which I consider to be the queen of watchmakers' lathes, or the king, really. So I presume it's going to be in alphabetical order. £10. So I think, yes, this section here was Favorite, Coronet, Bowley and Linen. There we go, yes. Great, isn't that great? Look at that engraved plate there, that engraved print. So at that stage, by 71, we'd reached the pinnacle of horological lathes in the form of the Bowley F1. I'll do a video about the F1 sometime, but you can see that the lathe is used with the headstock facing the operator, which is quite the opposite to every other lathe, including every other horological lathe where you work, facing the work just like a normal lathe, with the work running left and right. Whereas this way you're looking straight into the workpiece. Anyway, I have the latest reprint of this book, which it's nice to get an early copy because mine was printed in the 1990s, I think. So anyway, that was knocking about there, so I picked that up. Now this is quite interesting, and it's a tool for which I don't actually have a use yet. But I anticipate that at some point I will be able to put it to use. Now there are many of you who will immediately recognize what this is. I had no idea what it was, but it was pointed out to me. And because I had expressed an interest in the tool that it's designed to go with, I immediately snapped it up. It's made by Starrett, the American tool company, who also, by the way, had a production facility in the British Isles, but this one was made in America, Athol, Massachusetts. I don't know if that's an abbreviation, Athol, because it's got a little full stop there. In any event, this is a gauge to be used for setting the tool height or the cutter height on a shaping machine. Now they had a bigger one there as well, but they were not for nothing. And I thought, well, I don't have the shaping machine, although it's something that's definitely on my shopping list. And I found, if I were to find a really nice shaping machine, I'd go out of my way to own it. And it can be used in both orientations, so that way and that way. So that's a square. It's got a little spirit level inside the frame there, and a very basic gauge. And so by freeing this little thumb screw, you can slide the upper part up and down that slope, thereby raising the height of that surface. It looks as though there might have been something attached to that, but it is a ground surface, and so it wasn't really clear as to exactly how it's used, but basically you set this next to your workpiece that's mounted in the shape of ice, and adjust it such that the two surfaces are absolutely level, so that this surface is level with the top of your workpiece. So then you know that this height represents your workpiece. And then you can go and use it to set your tool extension, or so basically that your first cut can be taken with some precision. Although, just thinking about it, I don't know why you couldn't do that without this gauge. You could advance the ram of the shaping machine up to the workpiece, and then just feed it down ever so slightly until it just about scraped the surface, and then you were on zero, if you like. So I'm going to do a bit more reading about this, because I'm not sure that his description was very precise. And so that surface, when you turn it through 90 degrees, performs a similar function, apparently. But look at the beautiful color case hardening pattern seen there. It's got somebody's initials there, invariably, LCC, and there's an LC on that upper limb as well. Beautifully made, little scalloped area here for your thumb and finger, and just really a beautiful tool. And as I say, the shaping machine is definitely on my shopping list. So if that is indeed what that is, it will be a useful accessory. Oh, there, what's that? Number 246. Now, do I have a Starrett catalogue? Can't remember. Anyway, I think I've got a Brown and Sharp catalogue. I'm sure that'll be, I'll see something about that online if I Google it. So that was that. Then that's not very interesting, but it's a protractor, and I've never had one of these, and there's been a couple of times when it would have been useful to me, although it's not considered to be a very high precision tool. It can be useful just for setting things up quickly, and this is a Moore and Wright, so that's a good English make, Sheffield. And interestingly, the box it comes in, and I think I've mentioned tools I've had from this James Neal company before, tiny little punchers in fact, but it's got on the end of the box engineered steel protractor made in England, and indeed inside the box, and it appears to suit because it's the correct size, is an engineer's protractor, but not by somebody called James Neal, by Moore and Wright. So I'm guessing that this James Neal must have been like a vendor or a factor. And so in any event, that's a little protractor. And some wax paper. What does it say? Keep this vapor phase inhibitor, VPI, rust preventative paper insert in the pack to protect the tool. All right then, I will. For the time being, my workshop is nice and dry, so hopefully I can never be required to be used in vapor phase action. Now this is really cute. So original branded Eclipse tool bits box. However, I don't think this is the correct box because it says square tool bits 5/16, whereas in fact these are round, but they are Eclipse brand, high-speed steel. Now it's not as though I'm struggling for tool bits, so that's my selection of tool steel. You can see I've got a number of parting blades there, and in this section I've got lots and lots of tool steel. Some never touched, like brand new pieces, and some are already ground into cutters. I think that is my very earliest parting tool, which is a couple of pieces of tool steel brazed onto probably a piece of key stock. Now, some of these are no name and some of these are okay, but there is definitely something to be said for using good quality tool steel if you are still inclined to use tool steel bits as opposed to carbide inserts. I think I bought these ages and ages ago as a job lot for a £5 or something, and that's 1/4 inch by 3. What is that? 3 inches? Yeah, so that's 1/4 by 3 inches. So, you know, you can buy it for a £5. I don't know. Listen, again, first world problems, and it's more tool steel than I'll ever use in my life. But I'm an absolute sucker when it comes to old brand name things like this, especially when they're in the original packaging. And so each of these pieces of tool steel has a sticker. Eclipse, high cobalt, high speed steel, made in England. So for those who've not heard my Sheffield rant, well, it's not really a rant, it's just a kind of lecture. Sheffield had absolutely tied up the world's production of the best steel. Particularly a company called Frith Brown made the best quality low sulfur steels. And without going into too much detail, one of the reasons why Sheffield had the best steel was because they had centuries-long contracts with the Swedish iron ore producers in northern Sweden, in a place called Kiruna. And so all the world's best, I think it was something like 60% of all Swedish iron ore was contractually bound for Sheffield. And that's how Sheffield came to be so famous. Okay, we know that you know, the Bessemer process and in fact the production of steel itself was industrialized around the Sheffield area, but they certainly had fantastic raw material. And so where you see something made in England like this, it's going to have been Sheffield steel, and there's going to be exceptional quality. And they're all cobalt, and so cobalt steel is particularly good as cutter tool bits. And so these 1/4 inch bits are great for using on my eccentric engineering tangential tool holder, which I have referred to in another video. So an absolute sucker for any vintage tool like that that's got the old label, made in England. Great. Really pleased to have laid my hand on that lot. Oh, I better put it in the box with the other tool steel. Loads of other little tool steel bits here. There's lots and lots of small pieces that are already ground. So I've ground very few of these myself. I have ground a fair number, but many of them have come my way with, you know, lathes and stuff. This is cobalt steel. In my early days of experimenting with different types of watchmaker's graver. Speaking of Sheffield makers, in my little tool steel box was this tool, which was supplied to me by Malcolm Wilde, a Sheffield tool maker, horological tool maker. But this is an interesting tool. It's a small diameter turning tool. And so this piece here is designed to be clamped in a tool holder, and there's the cutting tool. And then what you do is that bushing, which is one of, you know, a number of bushings you can make for the tool, you drill out and ream to the size of the stock. So if you've got something that's, you know, 5/16 of an inch, and you want to turn it down to, you know, 3/32 or something, if you've got a longish workpiece, it's going to flex in the lathe, and it's invariably a, you know, troublesome operation. So what you do is you drill a hole in that bushing and bore it 5/16, so that really it becomes like a traveling steady, because that's the cutter. And so you can then advance the tool by this thumb screw, and you can kind of cut as far as you want, because all the cutting pressure is being taken by the job in the hole. And so I don't know where the bushes are that I've used. So very good for clock arbors, which are normally long and spindly. You need to turn various diameters, you know, over longish distances. So that's great. So I would recommend looking at Malcolm Wilde's website, because he has made some fantastic tooling and still does. And in fact, he supplies some kits as well that you could build as projects. In fact, the very first kind of learning exercise I did in you know, full-size turning was a project by Malcolm Wilde, my overhead drive arrangement for the lathe, which can drive an independent spindle. So that's my overhead drive, and that was supplied as a kit of castings by Malcolm Wilde. All the materials necessary except the electric motor, all the material, and you know, I machined everything, and it taught me a lot about turning, and also about the fits required to make things work. And I messed it up really, because a lot of these clamping handles are on the wrong side. So by the time I got to slitting the castings to make clamps, you know, so to let the thing get clamped up, you know, that one's okay. It doesn't really matter which way around that goes. That's just a little stock collar. But by the time I came to slit these, and then one side would need to be drilled, a clearance hole, and the other side tapped, I'd gotten impatient and wasn't thinking nor looking at the instructions. And so some of these handles are well round the wrong way round, making it pretty awkward to operate. But the point is, that's from Malcolm Wilde in Sheffield. And I'd recommend, I think his website is JMW Clocks. And if you Google that, he'll come straight up. Last thing in this box is this little grate. I'm not sure if I published the video yet where I started burning my workbench because I was using it as a hearth with the cleverest hearth setup in the world. And so that was knocking about. That's a little brazing hearth element in cast iron. Just keeps the bricks off the surface. So that was all that.